Senator from California.
Mr. President, under the order, I would ask that I have up to 20 minutes to address the Senate.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. President, I rise today to urge Senator Reid to say a very clear no to the request by 37 Republicans that we create a new Senate Select Committee on Benghazi. I was really astounded to see 37 Republicans, many of whom have worked on this issue with me and Senator Menendez on the Foreign Relations Committee, just essentially make this request at a time when we have so much information already on Benghazi, and to spend the funds for this separate committee, in addition to the one that the House has set up. To me, it doesn't make any sense unless you believe, as I do, that this is all a political witch hunt. The attacks of September 11th, 2012 in Benghazi that took the lives of 4 Americans, including Ambassador Chris Stevens, that was a tragedy. After such a tragedy, we should all come together to make certain that something like this never happens again. But we shouldn't play politics. Instead of focusing on how we prevent future attacks against U.S. personnel overseas, instead of agreeing, as they've had an opportunity to do, to add more funding for diplomatic posts to protect our people, the Republicans want to turn the Benghazi, Libya tragedy into a scandal. And let me tell you what I think is scandalous. The way they are handling this issue is a scandal. And the American people are smart. And I've seen recent polls, they get it. More than 60%, and I'll go back and look again, say it's all about politics. It's not about anything else. Now, I want to explain to the American people what we have done about this tragedy here. Over the last 20 months, these attacks have received unprecedented scrutiny. And I have a chart that I want to share that explains it. Mr. President, we have had 9 House and Senate committee investigations on Benghazi. We have had 17 hearings conducted. We have had 50 briefings held. We have had 25 interviews conducted, 8 subpoenas issued, 25,000 pages of documents reviewed, 25,000 pages of documents reviewed, and 6 reports released. And all of these little boxes, Mr. President, that are represented here shows the various hearings, the various committees, the various briefings, the various documents. And you look at this chart and you realize this is unprecedented. 9 different House and Senate committees have investigated the attacks. 17 hearings have been conducted. 50 briefings have taken place. 25 transcribed interviews have been conducted. 8 subpoenas have been issued. More than 25,000 pages of documents have been reviewed, and 6 congressional reports have been released. Now, I've gone over this a couple of times this morning because I want to make sure the record reflects all of this accurately. Now, in case that doesn't do enough, Mr. President, to convince the people of this country what a witch hunt the Republicans are on, I want to show you just a partial viewing of the materials. If you'd excuse me while I bend down. That's just one. All of these binders are filled with all the information that came out of these reports. So before people just get up here and say, oh, we need more information, how about reading what we already have? Stacks and stacks of information. In here lies the reports and the testimony Congress has already heard over the last 20 months. But my Republican friends would have you believe none of this happened. None of this happened. They're not satisfied with exhaustive reviews, by the way, much of which were conducted by House Republican committee chairs. They walk away from their own work because they're playing politics. They should be proud of the work they did. But this isn't about that. It's about playing politics. It's about hurting people. Hurting people. Benghazi was a tragedy. We lost 4 beautiful, patriotic Americans. Don't turn it into a scandal. Now, over in the House, I guess this wasn't enough for them. I'll take these down now. Could you help me take that? This wasn't enough for them. 9 committees, 17 hearings, 50 briefings, 25 interviews, 8 subpoenas, 25,000 pages of documents, 6 reports. Not enough for them. The House set up a new select committee. And again, 37 of my friends here, Republican friends, they want their own select committee. That's right, 2 new committees to investigate what has been investigated. You don't need a degree in political science to know what a political witch hunt looks like. All you need is to look at this, and you understand. This is a campaign tactic by my Republican colleagues to gin up their base ahead of a midterm election. And by the way, look ahead to 2016, where they are filled with anxiety at the thought that the former Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, may be the Democratic nominee. This is a campaign tactic, this call for these committees. We know that Republicans have been actively fundraising off this tragedy. That's right, fundraising off this tragedy. And when Speaker Boehner was asked about it, all he did was waltz away from the question. I watched that interview. It was painful. They said, aren't you going to stop the fundraising? And he said, we're just interested in the facts. And they said, aren't you going to stop this fundraising? We're just interested in the facts. Answer the question. And we know it's a political witch hunt because before he was minding his P's and Q's, the House Select Committee chairman suggested the administration should be, quote, put on trial over Benghazi. Put on trial. We also know the House GOP refused House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi's offer to put an equal number of Democrats and Republicans on the panel. Oh, no. Because it's a political witch hunt, and they want total control over that committee. Now, here's one thing I know. The Select Committee won't be investigating over there. And that is the budget cuts that House Republicans made to security at our embassies, at our consulates, at our diplomatic posts around the world. Cuts that Republicans actually boasted about making. And here in the Senate, we've tried to get through an embassy security bill by unanimous consent, and they objected. I don't know how many times, a couple of times. So you're not going to see an investigation into why the Republicans thought it was wise to cut spending on embassy security. Oh, no, they won't look at that. Do you know that one of the congressmen over there was asked by CNN whether the GOP cut embassy security, because a reporter was incredulous. And this congressman said, quote, "Absolutely. Look, we have to make priorities and choices. You have to prioritize things." So clearly, this particular member of Congress was proud that they cut embassy security. But believe me, they're not going to be investigating that in their investigative committee. I'll tell you what else they're not going to investigate, Mr. President. They're not going to investigate the tragedy and the scandal of more than 4,000 Americans killed in the Iraq War based on phony intelligence. 4,000 Americans dead based on phony intelligence. I never heard one call for a select committee to find out why that happened. And that ignores the tens of thousands of wounded with post-traumatic stress and all the problems we know are happening. And here's something else they won't tell you. Between 1998 and 2013, there were at least 501 significant attacks against U.S. diplomatic facilities and personnel in 70 countries, resulting in the deaths of 586 people, including 67 Americans. During the Bush administration, there were 166 attacks, which killed 116 people, including 18 Americans. All of these attacks were terrible tragedies, but not one of them was exploited for political gain. Why would we exploit a tragedy where an American got killed for political gain? We could have done it. You know, I was serving in the House back in 1983. I know that's probably close to when you were born, Mr. President. I was serving the House in 1983 when a truck bomb exploded outside the Marine barracks in Beirut, Lebanon. It killed 241 American service members. The attack came just 6 months after 17 Americans were killed in the bombing of the U.S. Embassy in Beirut. Now, let me tell you about how that was handled by then Speaker Tip O'Neill when Ronald Reagan was president. Tip O'Neill conducted real oversight with the two parties working closely together. Within 2 months, the House stepped forward. Democrats, Republicans produced a report that criticized the lax security around the barracks and called for new measures to keep our brave military men and women safe. That's the way we should handle these things, not a kangaroo court, not a political witch hunt, not a partisan investigation. Let's face it, this is politics. They're about discrediting the Obama administration and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. I repeat, never in history, to my knowledge, and I've gone back and back, has any political party done what they are doing on Benghazi. And there's disinformation. They say, well, the president kept saying it was because of the movie that was produced. The president stepped forward and his first comment said the attacks were an act of terror. His quotes. You never hear that from the Republicans. He called it an act of terror. And I'll tell you what else they forget to mention, that Secretary Clinton was the first person to convene an independent investigation of the attacks. Let me reiterate. The very first person to call for an independent investigation of the attacks in Benghazi was Secretary Hillary Clinton. Now, the independent investigation was nonpartisan. It was called an investigation by the Accountability Review Board. It was chaired by Ambassador Thomas Pickering and Admiral Michael Mullen. Now, talk about a nonpartisan team. I can attest to the fact they are. I'm privileged to sit on the Foreign Relations Committee. I'm the most senior member there, and I will tell you, these two gentlemen came forward and delivered their report. They talked very openly and honestly about the systemic problems that undermine security in Benghazi. And guess what happened after that report? Secretary Clinton and the State Department quickly accepted all 29 of those recommendations and put them into place. First Secretary Clinton and now Secretary Kerry. So let me say this again. There's this call for this political witch hunt because they want to hurt Hillary Clinton. And Hillary Clinton was the first person to call for an independent investigation that made 29 recommendations that she started to put in place, and Secretary Kerry is completing that task. Unbelievable. But you won't hear that from my Republican friends. They want to make Benghazi into a scandal, and they're the scandal. That's the scandal, playing politics with a tragedy. That's the scandal. Now, the Senate Intelligence Committee produced a bipartisan report based on dozens of committee hearings, briefings, and interviews. That's in here, too. It highlighted the need to better respond to security threats against our diplomatic posts and personnel around the world. So instead of going over all these reports, I showed you how many there are, and this chart shows you in a very clear way how many investigations. Instead of focusing on protecting Americans serving abroad by carrying out the recommendations of these reports, my colleagues are obsessing over talking points prepared for a Sunday TV show. Now, let me tell you, there is nothing in the thousands of documents released that even remotely suggests an attempt to cover up what happened in Benghazi. As I said, the president said it was a terror attack. Hillary Clinton launched the investigation. The investigation made 29 recommendations. This new select committee request is a sham. It's a kangaroo court. It's a waste of taxpayer dollars. If Senate Republicans really want to help protect the men and women who bravely serve our country overseas, they would stop objecting to our request to take up our bipartisan embassy security bill. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee passed S. 1386. Guess who it's named after? Chris Stevens, Sean Smith, Tyrone Woods, and Glenn Doherty. It's called the Stevens-Smith-Woods-Doherty Embassy Security Threat Mitigation and Personal Protection Act. It was passed in December of last year. It was authored by Senators Menendez and Corker, and I thank them for that. This bill will authorize funding for key measures recommended by the Accountability Review Board, including security upgrades at our embassies, consulates, and other diplomatic posts, especially high-risk posts. It also authorizes new funding for security training, including language training for high-threat security environments, and it would direct the Secretary of State to expand the Marine Corps Security Guard Detachment Program to help protect our diplomatic facilities and personnel. Why do the Republicans keep objecting to this bill? You cannot, with a straight face, tell me you really care about our foreign personnel when you stand in the way of S. 1386, a bill to provide for enhanced security, a bill that was bipartisan, a bill that came out of the committee on which I serve, Foreign Relations. So, Mr. President, I hope other colleagues will come down here and talk about this sham. We've got so much to do. We need to grieve for the families. Yes, the 4 Americans, and their loss is deep, very deep. But to turn that into some investigation, some witch hunt, is not the right thing to do for their memories, The right thing to do for their memories is to pass this embassy security bill. You know, I don't know how to say it, but it does cost money to make upgrades to your home, to your buildings. We here in the Capitol, we protect and upgrade these beautiful buildings because they're history. We've got to upgrade our buildings. That doesn't come free. It does cost money. And yet House Republicans were bragging that they cut embassy security. So I'm going to talk about this a lot because I care so deeply about making sure that our personnel are safe all over the world. And until they allow this bill to go through, I just really question the deep concerns that are being expressed by my Republican friends. Oh, they need yet another committee to get to the bottom of Benghazi. We know what happened. It was a terror attack on a facility that needed more protection, okay? And how do we make sure that doesn't happen again? We've had more than 500 attacks, major attacks, on our facilities since 1998, between 1998 and 2011. More than 500 attacks. Never has anyone of any party tried to play politics with it. And the reason I'm so, shall we say, upset with it is because it's the wrong way to move forward. People look at us and they wonder if we can get anything done. I'm so proud. I have a very important water resources bill coming up. We've worked so well together across the aisle. We did a highway bill. We worked so well across the aisle. Why don't we do what we did when Tip O'Neill was Speaker and work well across the aisle on foreign policy? When I was coming up, foreign policy basically stopped at the water's edge. We respected the president, whoever it may be, Republican, Democratic. And if we had a critique, we expressed it, but we did it in a way that was, if I could just say, less partisan, less partisan. So I will leave you with the image of this chart, and just this chart says it all. We have investigated this, we have looked at it, we have conducted hearings and briefings and interviews and issued subpoenas and reviewed documents, issued reports. We don't need to spend money on another committee because someone is afraid of Hillary Clinton's candidacy. Just deal with it, okay? Don't try to revise history. She was the first person to call for an independent investigation and begin to put the pieces into play that would, in fact, make sure this didn't happen again. And don't say you care about embassy security when you stand up and oppose a bipartisan bill that would make sure we make the requisite improvements to our facilities. And so I hope that Harry Reid, our leader, will not say yes to a committee that is nothing but a political witch hunt, and I will continue to come down to the floor to discuss this issue, to debate this issue, if it is necessary to do so. Thank you very, very much, Mr. President, and I yield the floor, and I do note the absence of a quorum.